Alright, hello everyone, welcome back. Hope y'all are doing well during this quarantine season. So this week we're going to be going over UI collection views. Last week we went over table views. And so quickly we'll do some review. And so first question is, what are table views made up of? I'll give you quick 10 seconds to think of it. You can pause this video as well. But yeah, so the answer would be sections that contain rows and cells. And so if you remember, we had functions like cell for row at, and that pretty much defines what each row of the table view presents. And then there are sections that break up different subsets of rows. And then secondly, which table view method is optional to implement? And so if you remember, we had some methods from the protocol that we conform to for table view delegate and table view data source. Some of them are required and some of them are optional. And so here we'll see that did select row at is actually optional. And so one small reasoning behind this is because you may not always want to have some extra functionality when you tap on a row. You may just want to be displaying it, and it doesn't really have to do anything past that. But yeah, let's jump into UI collection views. So UI collection views are used to display a grid of items, and it's very, very similar to UI table view. In fact, you can pretty much mimic a UI table view using a UI collection view, and we'll go into a lot of this in a little bit. But some examples we have are your photo album app. You'll see that all the images there are 3 images per row, and if you were to be thinking of this in terms of table view, each one of these rows would contain 3 images, but instead for a UI collection view, each one of these images is its own item or the equivalent of a row. And we'll talk a little bit more about the more technical stuff in a bit. But yeah, another example is with Netflix or Spotify. You'll see a lot of them also have horizontal scrolling rather than just vertical scrolling, and then multiple items per row and how it's structured. And it tends to give a lot more flexibility on that end. And so yeah, I guess in terms of the similarities, you'll see that we have a data source and also a delegate for a collection view. And so here we have number of items in section, and you'll remember from a table view we had number of rows in section. Very similar concept, but it determines how many rows or objects you're going to be rendering. And then same thing for cell for item at, it's equivalent to the cell for row at. And pretty much does the same thing, tells you what view you want to render for your cell. Yeah, and so I guess something to keep in mind is whenever we talk about item, you can think of it as synonymous with the row for table view. Some of the big differences, I guess, are allowing for vertical and horizontal scrolling. With table view, you're restricted to just vertical. You can also adjust the height and width of each cell, whereas for a table view, you can only adjust the height because the width is just constrained to whatever the width of the table view is. And it would be the same for all rows. And you can create a UI table view, like I said, with a UI collection view, but you can't do the opposite. You can't have a grid layout with 3 items per row with a table view. And so one other thing that allows a collection view to do this is the UI collection view flow layout. And so this specifies how the collection view items flow from one row to the next. And some properties include the scroll direction, inner item spacing, so that's how much space there is between each object. So for the photo album, between each image, then the item size, and then also line spacing. And it'll make a little bit more sense, the difference between these two spacings once we go into it. And so today our demo is going to be going over building out this view. We'll see that we have several different images of Bill and Melinda Gates, but yeah, we're laying them out in a grid layout. And so if we open up the demo code that we've provided, let's see right here. And so the first thing you'll notice is that we already have all the UI collection view layout stuff. We'll initialize it, and we have it constrained. And so if you run this, we'll see pretty much just a white background. And the collection view hasn't been instantiated, nothing is in it. But yeah, what we'll first want to do is create the model that we're going to be using for our object. And so we know from, actually let me open up the image again. So we know from this that we want to be creating what represents a person. So it's going to be an image, and we can think of more things along the way. But yeah, we'll just create a Cocoa Touch class. You can call this a person. Actually, I don't know what. We can just create a Swift file. That's fine as well. It'll be called person. Sorry, I sped through that a little bit. Let me go back very quickly. So what we'll want to do is create a new file, and since we're going to be instantiating, or like just creating the model, we don't exactly need it to subclass anything. And so for here, we're just going to click on Swift file, and this is going to represent our person object. And so we'll see here, it's just person.swift. We'll move it in here. I don't know why I created it in the wrong place. But yeah, we're going to call it, we're going to create this new structure that's going to encapsulate, I guess, our image, which is going to represent or be a string, our image name. And I guess we can also do profile name as well. I don't think we'll be presenting this in here. So yeah, actually for now we'll just keep that out. And so now if we go back into our view controller, we'll want to start setting up our collection view. And so we can do collection view equals UI collection view. And so you'll see that we have two different, we'll use this initializer, and there are two different things we want to do for this. 0. The reason why we do .0, I don't know, pretty much we're going to end up using constraints to lay this out anyway, so the frame doesn't exactly affect where it gets laid out. I can quickly check like what we usually do. Yeah, I would just suggest go .0 and then do all your layout constraints later. But you'll see here that we have this UI collection view layout object that we have to pass in. And so that's what I was referring to earlier with the flow layout object. And so we'll create one of those, UI collection view flow layout, and you can just use the empty initializer, and you can do layout dot, and you'll see there's a lot of things in here. And so the first thing we'll want to do is set the scroll direction. Here's where we can do either vertical or horizontal. For now, we'll just do vertical because we're going to be building out a vertically scrolling screen, but we can also do horizontal if you feel like that's what you want for your app. And then some other things we want are the inner item spacing. And so here we're actually going to use this padding as the inner item spacing. And pretty much what this is going to do for us is in here, you'll see that between each item in this row, there's 8 pixels of space between them. And then to get this spacing, we want to do the minimum line spacing. Or I think that's the term for it. And so we'll go here, layout.minimum line spacing. And we'll actually use padding instead, just to keep it consistent. If we want to end up changing it to be a lot larger, it is a lot simpler if we just keep one constant and refer to them. And so now we'll pass this directly into here. and we'll do collection view, or view dot add subview collection view. And then we'll also want to lay out the constraints. And so this is the initial steps for just creating a collection view, but you'll notice we have nothing that we've passed into it. Like, we're not telling the collection view what to present, what information is there, blah, blah, blah. And so now we'll, like, technically there is a collection view here, but it's just not being presented. And so now what we want to do is very similar to the table view, but we want to set the data source and the delegate. And so usually we do data source equals self, and that's because the view controller wants to be handling all this, but you'll see that there is this issue because the collection view, or the view controller, doesn't conform to it. And so what we'll want to do is extend the UI view controller to conform to UI collection view data source. And similar to how we had the table view, it'll just tell us to add these protocol stubs, and you'll see these two required functions, number of items in section and cell for item at. And so these two pretty much the equivalent of the table view functions, but we'll want to pass in the information somehow. And so what we'll want to do is we're going to create I don't know, people will be our list, and it'll be a list of person objects, and we'll first create it as empty, and then in here we're going to want to set let's create two new people for our two Bill Gates and Melinda, and so Bill equals new person object, and it's going to have image name is, I'll just copy it directly from here, it's going to be Bill Gates, and then Melinda, same thing, image name, I believe it's just Melinda, yeah. And so what this is going to do now, we have two objects, and they're just two structs, and now we want to adjust our peoples array to have multiple Bill and Melinda objects, and we'll just copy and paste this like 5 times, should be fine. But yeah, so now we have this similar structure where we want to pass in the number of objects we want to render, and so for us that's going to be coming from our peoples object, or peoples array, and so here we're just going to return people.count, and so this will tell our collection view that we have 2 times, this is of length 10, so we have 10 items that we want to render. And then cell for item at, we will also have a very similar setup to what we did in the table view, but what we'll have to do is create a new UI collection view cell. And so if you remember from the table view, we did a UI table view cell, but for a collection view, very similar, but we just do a UI collection view cell, and we'll call it a person collection view cell, just create it in here, and so we're going to override our frame, or like our initializer for frame, and so what we'll do here, sorry, I'm just jogging my memory, we have to call super on it, and what we'll do is in here we're going to have all of our layout for this collection view cell. And so we know that for our for each one of these cells we want to have it so that it's just a UI image view, and it's going to take up this like a third of the whole space, and pretty much we're just going to constrain the image view to the ends of the item and adjust the item size later. And so what we'll do here is image view. And here we'll create the image view. For now, we're just going to create it as an empty image view. It's not going to have an image just yet because we'll want to configure it based on which person object we're going to be passing in, right? And so I guess like some other small things for kind of just like the styling of each of these image views. We're going to set the content mode to .scale aspect fill, and this is just like, I guess, iOS's way of trying to figure out like what to do with like overflow images, or like how to rescale them to fit the image view. And then another thing we do is called .mask to bounds, and this just constrains. So let's say if like we pass in two different images, one that went outside the box that it's constrained to, mask to bounds basically says like don't let it overflow, cut it off at the bounds of the view that it's within. So in this case, since we're going to be adding our image view to our collection views content view, or our collection view cells content view, we are constraining by saying like image view dot layer dot mask to bounds equals true. We are constraining this image view and whatever is inside of it to the bounds of the collection view cell. And so yeah, one other thing we will have to do is dot translates auto remasking or auto resizing that thing. And then as always, we have our function setup constraints. And so just to save time, I'm just going to copy these over. I will explain these right now, but what we're going to be doing is just setting the image view, all the image views anchors, so top, bottom, leading, trailing, to be equal to the content view. And so basically this is saying like this image view is going to be on all edges of the encapsulating collection view cell. And so now we go back into our view controller. Sorry, this is a lot of setup for the collection view, but it'll all come back together once we pass it into here. And so now what we'll want to do is, if you'll remember, we had our cell equals collection view dot DQ reusable cell. We use this DQ, why am I getting the wrong one? Here we go. We use this a very similar function in table view, but it's just dequeuing the cell. It's basically iOS's way of like being more efficient with rendering several cells. Like if this overflows, it'll just reuse previously instantiated cells. And so we're actually going to use the reuse identifier that we've declared for you at the top. And then similarly, we just pass in the index path. And so we also want to cast this as a person collection view cell. And so what this is going to do is basically similar to the UI table view, but you're going to be instantiating a new person collection view cell for each item in your collection view. And then last thing we can do for now is just return the cell. And so hopefully, if I did not miss anything, this should, oh, actually I did miss something. I did miss something. So our first thing that we have to do is that we see that like we've constrained our image, like our constraints are based on like what the size of the collection view cell is, but we haven't said anything about like what that actual size will be. And so what we'll want to do is create this extension for the delegate flow layout. So what the delegate flow layout does is it basically tells the collection view sorry, there are a lot of like different objects, but like this is going to be determining what the size of each item is and like lays out pretty much everything within the collection view. And so if I remember correctly, we end up setting the data source correct. Okay. Sorry, I'm blanking on a lot of this. But pretty much what we want to end up doing is having some sort of padding here, and then we have the cell, and then more padding, cell, more padding, cell, and then end padding. And so what we'll do here is pretty much we want to make the size of each item be the size of this divided by 3 minus these 2 padding spaces. And so we know that we have like the collection view's entire frame should be from this edge of the screen to this edge of the screen. So we also have this padding on the left and right, if I remember correctly. Oh, sorry. So our collection view actually starts here and ends here. We've already taken the padding into consideration with our constraints over here. And so now we just want to take the collection view's frame width and subtract these 2 paddings. And so we're doing this math here. So we're subtracting 2 times that padding, and then this new width, we're dividing it by 3 to find out what the width of one cell would be. And so we are pretty much just returning, it's going to be a square, and so the width equals height, and here's where we're laying out that size. And we just return a new CG size object to specify that. And then this we'll come back to later. But yeah, so now if we run this, I'm trying, hope this is going to do something. For now, in our cell, we're going to just do image equals named Melinda. So for now, we're just going to have them all render the Melinda image just so we can get something running and make sure that our constraints are all there and everything's good. So everything is not good. What did I forget to do? So here, if you guys remember with our table view, we had to register our cells class. So for this example, we have collection view, or person collection view cell, and we have to register it for a certain reuse identifier. And so that's why we've declared it at the top here. But this should now be registered. I'm trying to see if I am forgetting anything else. I did not do the translates. Auto resizing. Okay, perfect. Got something up. This isn't exactly what we wanted to present, but we'll get this going in a sec. So I guess to quickly recap, because I know I went through this a little quickly, we have set up our collection view. Frame is 0. Layout, we created our UICollectionView flow layout object and just pass it directly in. Similar to the table view, we have to register our custom collection view cell, as well as set the data source to equal this view controller class. And then, as always, turn this to false. setup constraints. And then also similar to the UITableView functions, we want to return the number of objects we want to render as well as what to render them as. And then lastly, for sizing related stuff, which seems to be somewhat of an issue here, but we want to conform to this UICollectionView delegate flow layout, and this is going to determine the size of each of our objects. I suspect that this is actually not. One more thing I'm forgetting. Delegate equals self. Hopefully this is okay. So this should be the last function the last step we need. Perfect. Okay, so I can quickly explain what was happening. We had this function, we added it in properly, but it wasn't, the collection view wasn't pointing to it because it never had this call. This function is coming from the UICollectionView delegate flow layout, which, if I remember correctly, is the type of this. Okay, we won't go too far into that. But yeah, pretty much we need to make sure that these two are set so that these functions are getting called and pointed to. Okay, perfect. So now we have all of our initial setup. Now we want to make sure that we're rendering the correct cell for each person object. And so here what we'll want to do is, if you remember with our table view, we just created a public function called configure, and usually it takes in a certain model object, and so for this it's going to be a person, and we want to, here's where we're going to want to be setting this image, and so here we'll actually be doing image view dot image equals UI image named, and we'll want to take in the person's image name. And so this is why we ended up storing this on the person object, and that's because we want to be able to render this UI image based on that. And so here, instead of creating this image, right now if we were to run this, we'll see that all the image views are blank because we're never setting it. So if we actually go back into here, now the last step would be to actually configure it. And so if we remember from the table view lecture, sorry, I'm like pointing a lot to this table view lecture, but I'm trying to highlight that these have a lot of similarities. But we want to use the index path that were passed in from the collection view function. And we're actually going to use the dot item. And so I mentioned this a little earlier as well, but for our table view, we use index path dot row. For our collection views, you want to, like, if you're comparing them to table views, you want to think of items as synonymous with the row. So for index path, we're going to use dot item. And so now this should index properly into this. And so yeah, we are rendering Bill, then Melinda, Bill, then Melinda, and so on. It's going from left to right, and then up to down. And so now we have this setup. I will actually just make it a little larger so that we can see some overflow. Dope. So yeah, we pretty much have our basic collection view laid out now. And one thing I quickly want to show is how we can change it to horizontal scrolling. I know this may be something that a lot of you will want to use. And so we'll see here, instead, I believe it goes Bill, Melinda, Bill, Melinda. So it goes up to down and then left to right. But yeah, and then you'll also notice that we have this issue with the minimum line spacing. Actually, I may be incorrect on this. It may still go left to right first. But yeah, we can adjust this minimum line spacing by setting more constraints on our sizing. But yeah, for now I'm just going to set it back to vertical. And so I guess this is our basic layout. There's one more thing we will want to do is, you'll see in our demo we have a header view. I'm not sure if we went over this in table views, but we want this to be constrained to the top of the collection view, but as we're scrolling we want it to also scroll. So we almost want it to be like inside of the collection view, but we don't want it to be its own item per se. And so Swift, or iOS in general, just gives us a way to do this by creating a header view. And so what we'll do, time to quickly jog my memory, we'll want to create a new file, and it's going to be UICollectionView reusable, UICollection reusable view. And so we're going to we're just going to call this header view. And we'll see in a sec how this is going to work. I believe we just override the init same way we did in the collection view cell. Super.init, and we just pass in the frame. And so now we just want to create, for now we can just create a label that just says this is my header view. And so we'll do var and so we'll do here label equals UI label, do label.text. This is my header view. Always make sure to have this. I tend to forget a lot as well. And then we want to add this to the content view. Oh, we can just directly call add subview. I guess the reason why this is the case and we're not doing content view or view.add subview is because this object itself is an encapsulating view. And so we just want to directly add it to this. And then we'll do same setup constraints. Call it. And then I am just going to copy this over because I hate writing constraints. Yeah, we'll go over it again. As usual, ns layout constraint dot activate, and then a list of all the constraints. And then we're just going to be setting the leading anchor of the label to be the leading anchor of the view itself. And then top anchor also equal to the top anchor, trailing, and bottom. We don't exactly need this stuff here, but it makes it a little more clear that we're pointing to this. Yeah, they're both equivalent. It's just implicitly self. But so now we have the layout for our UI collection view, or UI collection reusable view, and now we want to register this with our actual collection view, and like get it to actually constrain to this top. And so what we're going to do is, firstly, we're going to want to make sure to call .register. This does very similar thing as it does with the collection view cell as well as with the table view. It just essentially tells the collection view like what kind of objects can be used and like rendered within this collection view. And so we'll have a header view dot self, and we're going to use the header reuse identifier. And now we have some more delegate functions that we'll want to be using. And so firstly, we have view for supplementary. It's a very, very long one. Supplementary. Yeah, we can just autofill that. But what this one does is this supplementary view is within the collection view. It's basically iOS's way of like adding either a header or a footer. You can also do like some cool custom stuff with it, but it's an extra view that's, I guess, as the title says, supplementary to the collection view. And so for us, we're going to be doing a very similar thing. I'll type this out. We want to create the header view. We do collection view dot DQ reusable supplementary view. If I remember correctly, we just directly pass in. This is like a very weird specific thing. But yeah, this is telling it we're going to be DQing a section header, and then using the header reuse identifier, and then for index path. Reuse identifier and index path almost always consistent across all these functions, and we're going to want to DQ this as a header view object. And we can just directly return header view. And what this will do, I believe we actually have to do one more thing in our collection view. So similar to how we needed to lay out the size of each item, actually I'm curious to see what this will do if we just run it. But what we now need to do is, okay, so it's actually going to throw out attempt to register, which is not a subclass of your collection. So did I do this incorrectly? Register for supplementary view account. Okay, so I used the wrong function here. I apologize for this. Header view dot self. Sorry, let me quickly go over this again. So we usually do cell class for registering the cell. For registering a view, it says here like registers a class for use in creating supplementary views. And so this is actually going to be the register function that we want to use for our header view. And so I'm going to do the same thing for a supplementary view of kind. I'm just going to copy over the same thing. It's basically going to say this is going to be used as a section header, and then header reuse identifier. So we can actually delete this old function. Yeah, so now hopefully this should not crash, but it most probably will not look the way we want it to look. So actually it does not even show up. And so one reason why is because we need to set up like similar to how we set it up in the collection view cell, we have all the constraints equal to the content view or like the super view above it. Same thing here, we have the labels constraints equal to that of this view. But now this view needs to know where exactly it needs to live, what size, all this stuff. And so we're going to use, I hope this tells the delegate that specified view is about to be displayed. Let me just quickly find which function this is. Reference size for header and section. A lot of these functions have really, really long names. But yeah, you'll get a lot more comfortable with them a little later. Or I guess as you use it. But what we'll want to do here is we want to set the width of the header to be the width of the collection view. So like just centered in here. And then we also want the height to be, we should have declared a variable here, header height. So it'll just be 30 pixels. And we're going to use that as a height. And then same thing as we did here, just return the CG size object that corresponds with that. And so hopefully this is going to work. And it did not. What did I miss? Let's go back and debug. So first things first. So it actually is showing. I just completely forgot to set the background color equals top of white, and the text should actually be black. Do we want this to be the case? Yes. One other thing that I actually forgot is the text alignment. We'll notice here that because we're setting the left constraint, or the leading and the trailing constraints here, regularly this text would render from here and it'll look a little off. So actually we'll see what this looks like right now and we'll apply the fix. But yeah, it's setting the text from here because that's just how regular labels should look. But we actually want the text to be centered. And so do that. One other thing is we can just increase the font size. Seems to be a little small. Label dot font. Actually, yeah, I don't know. You can mess around with this, but I guess we don't need to do this for now. But yeah, I guess another quick recap of what we've gone through so far. We had our regular layout, we figured out how to do each of these items, and we've set up this header view. It would also be a very, very similar setup for a footer view if you wanted to do that. Essentially create another UI collection reusable view, register it the same way we did here, where we register it for a supplementary view of kind, and I believe it would be element kind section footer. I may be incorrect on that, but there should be a UI collection view type for that. And then we want to DQ it here, same way we did, and then we want to declare the size for it. And then everything else, if we want to style it anymore, we just go through this function, or this class. Great, so now we have a functioning display of a collection view. Now one last thing that we may want to add is being able to touch it, or like tap on each of the cells. And so you remember with a table view we had did select row at. We have a very similar function for collection views. I believe it is in the delegate data source. UICollectionView delegate. So we'll want to create another extension, UICollectionView delegate, and here we'll want to call did select. You'll see that it should auto populate it for you. We're gonna call did select item at, and for now we can just print out people at index path dot item dot image name. And so what this is basically going to be doing is it's going to index into our people's array, which if we remember is just all like the array of all of our objects, and it's going to use index path dot item, and this index path dot item refers to that which was selected or tapped on, and then we're just going to print out the image name. And if we run this and open our console, if I click on Melinda, then Bill Gates, and then to make it a little more clear on which one we are actually tapping, I'll print out the corresponding I guess index. So this should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minus 1, so 7, right? And then here, same concept. Here you can pretty much implement any more you can implement any more like custom logic. And so one thing we may want to do is when we tap on one person, maybe we wanted to switch to the other. So if I tap on a Bill Gates, we wanted to switch to a Melinda. And same thing for Melinda, we want to switch it to Gates. What we can do is if we let person equal people at index path.item, we're just pulling out which person was selected. And now we want to say if person equals Bill. Oh, do we even have access to this? Sorry, let me quickly move these a little higher. I'm just declaring this as a variable of the entire class, so we have access to these two objects or structs. And so now if we do, if it equals Bill, then we want to switch the person at that index to equal Melinda now. We can do same thing. If a person is Melinda, then we switch index path.item equals Bill. And so now what this does is it updates the people array. Oh, what did I do? Oh, so that's the reason why. So we can't exactly compare the person objects per se. We would have to create like an extra function that allows us to compare within here. But what we can do instead is we can add a field to our person object that declares a name for that person. And so this will throw us some errors here. But what we'll want to do, person name, I think that's what we called it. We're just going to add this field to both. And so now, instead of doing person equals Bill, we can do person dot person name equals Bill Gates. And same thing here. Dot person name equals Melinda Gates. Did I get my spelling right? I hope so. This will stop complaining. Yeah, so now we've gotten the logic down to update our people array. But there's one thing missing that we probably went over in table views as well. But it's that we need to update the actual collection view. So if we click on this, I'm clicking on it. Let me person name, just to make it a little clear that I'm actually clicking on these people. And so I clicked on Melinda Gates and then Bill Gates, but you'll see that like they're not updating visually. And so the thing that we're missing is we want to tell the collection view to actually reload the data, which basically reruns like the data source functions, reruns all the functions that were used to display this information. And so now if we call it at the end of this function, we'll see that it actually like pushes this fix through. So it updates the people array and then tells the collection view to rerun all of this. Now people.count is still the same, but now the people array and how we index into it changes. And then header view stays the same. But yeah, we need to make sure to call this .reload data just to tell it to actually push the updates through. I believe that is it for today's demo. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff that you guys could do with, especially with this flow layout. Just getting, I don't know, collection view tends to give a lot of flexibility with how much like UI can do. It is, like I mentioned before, you can create a table view with a collection view, but you can't create a collection view with a table view. And I guess that really just highlights how much flexibility you have with your collection views. And yeah, I guess some logistical notes. I will post on Piazza, or I should have posted on Piazza already, the new office hours link. Make sure to sign up if you need any help, and if there are no slots that are available for you, just make sure to post on Piazza, and we'll get someone who can reach out to you and help you with whatever's needed. There should be more slots this week, I believe, than last week. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. Hope everything's going well. And oh yeah, the project will be due Sunday as usual. This one will go over a lot of collection view stuff, and you guys will have a lot of time to experiment with the different functionalities. But yeah, thank you again for tuning in, and hope you guys' weeks and school in general is going well. Thank you.